good afternoon. Okay, welcome. Good morning, everybody, or good afternoon. Welcome back. It is a true honor to introduce today's second keynote speaker, someone whose life work has spanned multiple disciplines, touched countless lives, and continued to inspire profound transformation. Swami Dhyānānanda Sarasvati, formerly known as Noah So, is an ordained monk in the traditions of yoga and Advaita Vedanta, and I hope my pronunciation is not completely off
No.
here. um, their work focuses on self-regulation for survivors of racism-induced CPTSD, offering intersectional and non-sectarian guidance to those in need. But their impact reaches beyond that. For over 3 decades, Swami has been a leading voice in Afro-Deutsch Black German civil rights and empowerment. Many first came to know them in the early 1990s through their remarkable career in music, radio, television, as well as edutainment, as a host, singer, producer, editor, writer, and composer. Their groundbreaking book Deutschland Schwarz-Weiß, published in 2008, has become essential reading on structural racism in German-speaking countries and has remained a Spiegel bestseller as recently as 2021. With a wealth of experience delivering keynotes and lectures worldwide, they have also developed a systematic training course in racism-aware event planning, which is now used in academic institutions, government agencies, and NGOs to educate new members each year. After spending the last 6 years dedicated to monastic life, immersing in the study of Vedanta, Sanskrit, and associated disciplines, Swami returns to share their wisdom with us today. It is my great pleasure to welcome our second keynote, Swami Dhyānānanda Sarasvati, who will talk about justice versus spirituality, the cost of comfort in trying times.
Thank you so much, Silke. Thank you, everyone here. I'm honored and pleased to be speaking at this conference again as the Black German Heritage and Research Association and we have had many an exchange and mutual experiences in the last almost 15 years. So I would like to thank particularly Rosemary Peña, of course. Where would we be without her? And Rutgers University for the space, holding this space for these crucial conversations. Afro-Deutsche communities navigate complex challenges. And oftentimes we talk about them in terms of identity, justice, and belonging. And even thankfully now, increasingly, we're addressing health, finally, physical, mental health. But we rarely consider our spiritual health, at least not as a public topic. What happens when protective spiritual networks are absent? How does that impact our resilience? And how does it impact our ability to engage in social justice during difficult times? That's what I would like to explore today and invite reflection and discussion on how we can strengthen ourselves and even our communities in this regard. So we'll try to reflect on how reason and spiritual exploration can coexist and why critical thinking remains a vital part of spiritual life. So we'll say questions like, why do we demand expertise from a chemistry professor, but not from a spiritual teacher? What happens when we replace religion with hope? and leave out the means to verify it. Right? So honoring the theme of the conference, reckoning injustice. First point I would like to make is about reckoning. I am convinced, just as my predecessor, keynote speaker Malik, that I'm convinced that reckoning starts with ourselves, actually. We cannot wait for external validation to give us a feeling of having arrived, of being complete, of being fully adequate and acceptable. And then once my relationship with myself is strong, then I'm better equipped to assist others. So it's good to create environments where we're invited to learn as much about ourselves as we do about each other. I think more and more tendencies there that this is being put importance on. One way to discover who I am is to inquire externally by exploring my genealogy, engaging in community work, connecting with others, sharing our stories, holding space for one another. And such a journey deepens my understanding of my own history and how I am shaped by it and by the cultures and the communities that have influenced me. And another way of finding myself can be to take the route inside. And these two approaches are not mutually exclusive. A byproduct of an inward journey is that we often learn a great deal about ourselves. We begin to understand our own personality more deeply, and on a deeper level, how conditioning has shaped us. And with this awareness, then interacting with others becomes easier and becomes more fulfilling, because understanding my inner instrument better, I'm acting more intentionally, no longer from a place of reacting or unquestioned tendencies or buttons that get pushed. So in a way, this gives me more freedom. Right? I will be freer from myself, if that makes sense. So as has been mentioned some years ago, I became a monastic of Advaita Vedanta and also of yoga after many years of study and training in monasteries and ashrams. And so you can imagine that my perspective has shifted somewhat, maybe not entirely, but yeah, certainly in a way that is distinctly colored by my path. So of course, that's the case for everybody, right? Perspective is always colored by one's experience. In my case, that color might just be very orange now. So before I dive into the subject, let's briefly talk about the terms that I want to use so as to prevent any misunderstandings. And the chance of misunderstanding is not small when talking about religion, because depending on context and on culture, even the word religion has vastly different meanings. We're not so aware of this in the West, actually. That's why I want to address it. So we think that the word religion means what the religions are and what they do, which we know. But that is not what the word religion means in many other parts of the world. In the West, we tend to use the word spirituality more often when we talk about the matter pertaining to the individual, to the personal experience. So basically religion without the baggage. So, and that can in itself be already fragmenting. Let me also briefly say what it is that I am ordained in and focused on. Because if I hear that someone is a religious figure, I certainly have assumptions based on my own upbringing and culture of origin, which is Black German. And also because of the conduct of many people who identify with religion. That is just pattern recognition, right? So it's good to approach this with curiosity and a healthy level of caution. So in the Western context, religion is often presented as something that should not be questioned or doubted. So something that should be believed and followed. And that's that then. And this is not how religion functions in the South Asian context. What is called Hinduism, which is not actually even a word or a religion, because that is a colonial misunderstanding, an umbrella term for many, many religions, disciplines, schools of worship, philosophy, critical thinking, and associated practices, which are more properly maybe denominated Sanatana Dharma. In Advaita Vedanta, which is one of these traditions, the one I follow, faith is optional. To a great degree, it relies on inquiry and analysis, with a very crucial aspect being one's own experience. So if we cannot verify what we're being told through personal experience eventually, so if we cannot get to know it firsthand, then such an insight, will it actually be an insight? It will remain limited, right? In many Eastern religions, the divine is not necessarily viewed as an external entity. So first of all, it is optional in many traditions. And when it is there, it is not separate. In Buddhism, for example, and in many branches and traditions in Hinduism, Sanatana Dharma, the divine is understood as the most intimate to us, just obscured by our perception. Of course, also Buddhism can be understood as an atheist religion, right? So, but that is why often it does not matter so much in which form or shape or concept of the divine one worships or does not worship, because they are expressions. So there is space for all kinds of approaches to finding the highest truth, so to say. Vedanta accommodates a range of views on the divine. It can be the Great Spirit. It can be the creative principle of the universe. It can be the transcendental self, or Holy Mother, or Ma Kali, or any other manifestation. In the end, these are different ways for us to form a personal relationship, to facilitate our intuitive understanding. So they are not dogma, is what I'm trying to say. And explaining so lengthily here, because for one, I find it most interesting, obviously, and also so that you can, you see where I'm coming from in this regard, right? And not think, hopefully, that I suddenly developed a taste for dogma. In an academic context, this is quite important, because religion often appears on the scene as the antonym of reason, and very incompatible with science. Historically, every time a religious or religiously fundamentalist regime gains traction, the first thing it does is attack science and terrorize the scientists, and aggressively tries to erase scientific knowledge. Right now, we're witnessing it, right? Yet another wave of religiously justified attempts to erase scientific progress, along with human rights, protection for vulnerable. And so, yes, it's a good idea to be cautious about and around religious figures. Yet, if we look beyond the surface, we also know that the core teachings of most religions are often the opposite of what their loudest wielders claim. So the teachings of compassion, love, and unity are perverted by those who are seeking power. So therefore, we know the issue is not necessarily religion itself, but is the fact that as a powerful institution, it attracts power-hungry individuals. And so many of them accumulate there. I like to compare it to entertainment and arts. Music in itself is not flawed, right? For many, it is a great source of joy and comfort. But the entertainment industry is full of predators and is deeply problematic. So that's not the fault of music, though. Music itself is quite all right. Just that it can so easily be instrumentalized and twisted and exploited by those who have the inclination to do that. That is how, similarly, I see it with religion. We can understand religion as a methodology. So regardless of the influence and manipulation or compromises it has accumulated, at its core, it is simply a method, a structured approach to reaching a spiritual goal. Ideally, a tried and tested approach to reaching that goal. In much of Eastern religious thought, this is synonymous with reaching for myself. And that perspective is particularly relevant when discussing religion in the Black German context. The Black German relationship with religion differs significantly from the Black American experience with religion. Historically, it could hardly be more different. In the United States, religion has become, through Black communities, established as a pillar of Black spaces, culture, and community. Even for those who are not particularly religious, the church still has been able to function as at least a space of unapologetic Blackness, right? A space where people could simply be together. And cultural cornerstones and sites of resilience. As far as this applies only to straight and cisgender people. In religious spaces and communities, Black gender non-conforming and LGBTQI plus people have long faced exclusion, right? So from an intersectional perspective, religion has been far less protective and inviting. In Germany, religious spaces and institutions which are Black, or at least culturally equipped to serve Black individuals by understanding our experiences and keeping racism at bay, have largely been absent. Many of us grew up either in opposition to religion or in some spiritual void or religious void. And certainly in the absence of unapologetically Black spaces. In the Black German context, religion does not have connotations of Black culture. Quite the opposite. It's more perceived as a stronghold of whiteness, even white supremacist thought, if we think about the role religious leaders played in the project of colonization. For most of us, the only available religion was Christianity, presented in a version that did not account for Black people as fully human beings. So it was rather a tool for dehumanizing. And in many metaphors and imagery in songbooks, even to this day, Black people are portrayed as savages and heathens to be subdued and so on. And in the communities themselves, exclusion was not so much an issue of you may not enter this building, but it was more the everyday microaggressions or macroaggressions, like these racist songbooks. And I'm sure every one of you who has ever spent more than 3 hours with any religious community knows exactly to which gold medal level of passive aggressiveness some people can take their attitude on a regular day, and then to scale this up for Black people in a white religious community. Few exceptions have been there in metropolitan areas with over 1 million people, mainly in Hamburg, Berlin, Ruhrgebiet, Munich area, where some Christian churches from Ghana and Nigeria have formed close-knit communities. And these spaces are primarily from the first generation African communities, the immigrants. And with the second generation, oftentimes growing a little distant from these communities. There have also been Afro-Deutsche priests, still there, addressing these very issues within their communities and doing wonderful work to dismantle racism. But they were just a handful of people, right? While the numbers of Black people in Germany are much higher. So infrastructure-wise, Black spiritual service is very different from the US, where there are many churches, or even from our neighbor country, France, where there are many mosques and also churches that cater to the Black community because their experience is understood and included. They are a part of their communities. And being Afro-Deutsch from neither of one of these communities, turning to religious figures for spiritual guidance often proves unhelpful, because many just don't understand the complexity of our challenge, nor are they automatically trustworthy. So of course, there have always been great people, great souls, and some who do understand and can be trusted, but they are rarely the most visible or accessible. They tend to fly under the radar. Not everyone can find them. And while some of the more mystical religious traditions are more about inquiry and reasoning and understanding, many of the mainstream religions we find in Germany are about faith. And where it is about faith first and foremost, it needs to be necessarily, primarily, actually, about love. Because love is that which makes faith acceptable. Love is the verification within myself, which gives the permission to believe, isn't it? And this love needs to be sparked somewhere and nurtured. It has to come from somewhere. And that is very difficult if the religious community radiates something very different from love. Interestingly, in the German context and also history, churches have always both been place of progressive thought and putting great importance on the value of inclusion and compassion. For example, still today, many refugees find shelter and protection from deportation in churches, in church communities. Depends on who's leading them. But at the same time, they can also be strongholds of misogyny, racism, cissexism, heterosexism. Every place of worship wants to call itself inclusive. So, but many preach about inclusion while they have maybe 2 Black community members and no wheelchair ramp, and never once do they connect the dots. So many Black Germans naturally grow somewhat distant to the whole institution of religion. Another reason to not care too much about religion from a Black German perspective is that unless one is living in a tiny village in southern Germany, it is simply a better career move to stay away from religion also. Because there's a racist notion, anyhow already present, that Black people are less rational and superstitious. And being openly religious feeds into that notion of being less rational and superstitious. So yeah, that's a lot of issues, but I'm still convinced that spirituality is a Grundbedürfnis, a basic need, right? Maybe religion isn't a basic need, but spirituality is. And even if you disagree with me on that, I think we can at least agree that access to spiritual and religious service is important. Religion is a means of connecting to home, not the physical home, and not always in a way which we recognize. So when there is a place of worship, I might just show up, and sing along to the melodies and find it moving, that the other people are moved, and take part in some ritual and feel energized somehow, and without being particularly invested in the teachings or scripture. Yet something happened there. Something maybe answered back to a silent question I may have asked before or long before. And that kind of hearing back, that connection, is very difficult without other people, without a place of worship, without a spiritual teacher. That is very rare to find that alone, difficult also. And if something comes, it is unclear and can also be quite lonely. And thankfully, today in Germany, we increasingly have access to Black and indigenous religions that do understand Black perspective and experience and are qualified to cater to it. And many of these are the Black religions of the Americas and of the West Indies, such as Santeria, Candomblé, and Haitian voodoo. Not to be confused with the West African voodoo, which is much older. It's distinct. So these traditions have successfully integrated ancient religions and cultural knowledge, right? With the structures of existing and often colonizing Western religions. But we should not see those religions as a compromise or something like that. That would be fundamental misunderstanding. Where it matters, we never compromise, right? So we innovate and protect. And that is precisely what happened. So with more first generation immigrated facilitators of these religious traditions now present in Germany, many Black Germans are finally finding rituals and religious philosophies and communities and guidance which they actually find trustworthy. Traditions that at their core center the Black experience. For example, Bwiti, originating in West Africa, that is also rooted in self-realization, is gaining increasing interest. And a number of other indigenous religions. Well, they might not all necessarily be Black African diasporic in origin, but they have a deep lived understanding of oppression, having emerged in regions that endured ongoing colonial invasions and the enslavement of Black people. And as a result, they often reflect an amalgamation of African diasporic and Afro-Indigenous and indigenous and hybridized identities. And these distinctions are acknowledged in these religions and understood, and they inform also the way the spirituality is taught and practiced. And such religions oftentimes don't offer only spiritual insight, but also a deeply encoded understanding of sociological and psychological wisdom, which can further facilitate healing, which is kind of a precursor to spiritual insight for many people. But as far as I know, none of these religious offerings, which are only recently available in Germany, are institutionalized or receiving sufficient funding or any kind of state protection or recognition. So they're highly vulnerable. Usually they depend on a single facilitator who also has to work a full-time job while holding services in their own space. So yeah, naturally, an already marginalized community will struggle to generate the funding needed to sustain these traditions over generations as of now. So it is vulnerable. In the German context, also donations for religions or even for social services are not normalized or intuitive as necessary, because the state actually collects church tax. So yeah, and most community and social programs are run by organizations affiliated with the church or with the state, and therefore they're free of cost. And many programs which benefit minorities are free of cost. And anything community related. Paid programs are still an exception. So therefore, the majority of Germans aren't used to the idea that we have to pay for a religious service, or that is kind of indecent even. So it should not be mixed together. Money and religion should keep apart, which is much purer, of course, in the spiritual sense, but makes it difficult for the small diasporic religions to stay afloat. So if I don't pay for the temple service, then it will have to be discontinued. It's not an intuitive connection. Exceptions are Muslim and Hindu communities, and many first-generation-led diaspora communities from big religions are an exception. But yeah, in different Afro-Deutsche contexts, it will be difficult. And so if we want programs that cater to us, we have to pay for them, which is difficult the more marginalized the group is, right? And that leads to fewer offerings, which include them. That is why we have started a small foundation for intersectional self-care, spirituality being optional in it. But that too is a small grassroots, very limited in resources, but that is how we felt the need to at least make a small step to build something lasting in that regard. So now, why, from the perspective of religion, why should it matter if someone is black or white or indigenous? Religion deals with God and with the true self, and on that level of reality, there is no such thing as race or gender, right? I know you know, but as maybe the video of this talk may be viewed out in other contexts where maybe the people don't know, so let me briefly explain it. The point of religion is not to sit with the divine and be enlightened and have transcended all pain and suffering. That is when religion has already become obsolete, right? The point of religion is to teach people to get there. And teaching is communication. And communication only works when it reaches the people I'm addressing, when it's acceptable for the people I'm addressing. If I don't know much about a group's everyday experiences, then I will fail them. Because every time I'm making a point, I'm explaining something to my community, I use examples to clarify and to illustrate and bring it closer to their experience. That's not going to work if I know nothing about their experience, or if I'm in denial about the huge differences in our experience between the different groups. So a few of those people whom I constantly fail to address may return for the cake, or for a community, or maybe because they enjoy the ritual or the faith, whatever the reason, but I will not be a good teacher to them, right? And this is how exclusion also works, by simply not catering to a group, by denying their particular experience. Like, see disabled people in urban planning, or women in medical school syllabus. So, and see, in the work I did before I became a monastic, I've been dismantling the comfortable illusion of universalism for many years. Well, I mean, I attempted to dismantle it. And that always struck me as a really hartnäckige, we say in Germany, as difficult to really dismantle. This attitude of, we're open to everybody, anyone can come here, everybody is welcome. That sounds so nice and comfortable, and also so clueless. Because a failure to understand how exclusion actually works is problematic. It's not helping. And religious institutions of the mainstream are very good at that, still keeping more with the wish than with the reality in that regard of inclusion. Much can be thought and debated about the role of religion in individual life, and how useful religion needs to be for my everyday life. Matured spiritual perspective might be, it doesn't, because I have different priorities. I don't need to see spirituality or religion primarily as a source of something that needs to be useful, or as a occasion to make requests. I see it as a place where I'm simply being. But that is a perspective that can also be unhelpful to insist on it, at least. So in many of our scriptures, for example, it is clearly discussed that people might turn to religion because they feel something is lacking, or out of despair or grief, or because they want something, and that these are all valid reasons. One could argue that it's the point of religion to cater to people who are seeking something, who are seeking guidance or help or company in their endeavors. Because if I demand that people already have transcended all their worldly ambitions before they even engage with religion, then who am I actually helping? And that is one of the many reasons it could be seen as important that religious institutions remain involved also in social service. Because if immediate suffering is not acknowledged or addressed at all, then it can be difficult to connect with the whole teaching of compassion. And then also our involvement with the religion can lead to spiritual bypassing. Spiritual bypassing means choosing avoidance instead of contribution. For example, I cannot go cast my vote on Sunday because I have to meditate. That would be spiritual bypassing. kind of denial of this level of reality, because I wish I already were completely in a different level of reality. And of course, that will always catch up. Spiritual bypassing never actually works out in the end. Which brings us to the cost of comfort. So let's say I want spirituality in my life, but the religious communities I find are biased against me. Fine. So in my experience, spirituality and religion have not overlapped in any meaningful way, so I can easily bypass religion entirely. But where does that leave me then? Where else could I learn to find myself? Religion, for all its flaws, still provides some structured methodology for spirituality. Even if that methodology may be compromised or communicated in a shady way, it remains a method. Without it, my only alternative is to figure things out by myself. Trying to grasp something so complex and subtle, something I do not yet understand by myself, what does it sound like? Very close, very much like a textbook case of Dunning-Kruger effect. Or I could seek guidance, right? I enjoy learning and I have no issue exploring someone else's spiritual teachings. But here's the problem. Religion and common sense are so often seen as opposed to each other that we risk making the mistake of disabling common sense in order to explore spirituality. I can hold several PhDs, yet in my spiritual inquiry, I suddenly could find myself believing things I cannot verify. Things that contradict my own reasoning. And instead of questioning them, I accept them as part of, this is how spirituality works. And maybe that even feels refreshing. Finally, I can let go of my mental load and of all that thinking and reasoning I always have to do. And then I would have created a dissonance, right? A cognitive dissonance and a dissonance in my values and in my personality. Believing in something and finding it doesn't make too much sense, but at the same time continuing to believe in it is actually a pillar of personal and societal downfall, isn't it? Let me repeat it. Believing in something and finding it doesn't make much sense, but at the same time continuing to believe in it is a fundament of many of the problems we have in society today. This delusion. And self-delusion is the ultimate self-abandonment, from which springs the abandonment of others. So if that is the way I seek spiritual comfort, I do it at the cost of my integrity, right? And at the cost of peace around me. So that would be one of the costs. Here's another cost. If I'm willing to convince myself that reasoning can be discarded, then I have also made myself a good target for cults and for grifters. New Age bookshelves are full of authors who invented a method, trademarked a system, talked to God on their ranch, and now they want to sell it to us. And there's a simple test. If a path or a method is a tried and tested thing. So if many people have successfully followed it and passed it down, it has an epistemology. It can be taught and it can be verified that it produces results. And if, on the other hand, a method cannot be successfully transmitted, if we don't know whether anyone has actually arrived at their goal, why should we bother? And so what about those who claim to have been spontaneously enlightened? How exactly do they intend to teach it to us? By association. Like, say, if one morning I wake up and by some miracle, by some divine intervention, I have become a master violinist. Would that make me a good violin teacher? No, it would not. Quite the opposite, probably, because I skipped the finger exercises. I skipped the methodology. I skipped the technical questions and the whole integration and knowing which week to grind through to arrive at that note finally. If I don't know how I arrived, how would I be able to show the path to anyone else? So doing something masterly and teaching something, understanding something and helping someone else understand it, transcending and interpreting. All these are not the same thing. That's all I'm trying to say. And that's even just assuming that New Age teacher has even reached their own spiritual goal. In reality, far more people thrive off spiritually interested or deprived people who feel, who are searching for meaning. In every major religion, we find a common teaching that is keep the ego in check, right? True masters should have a little reduced ego. They should be less personally invested, especially in their own importance or how important other people find them. And so a good way to assess some of these figures is maybe how do they present themselves? Did they trademark a breathing technique? Did they build brands around their name? How do they promote their appearance? Did this person just call themselves divine? And so on. So attention breeds notoriety, and notoriety attracts followers in the spiritual entertainment industry. And that danger is always present. The intuition, conditioning, and wishful thinking are closely entangled. Unless we're already free to a big extent of emotional baggage, which, let's be honest, very few people are. There are a good number of situations where it might be better not to trust our intuition. Because much of what we call intuition is simply conditioning. And so how can we separate that from a deeper, a subtler knowing? Especially in an area where we passionately want something to work, right? We want something to be true. It is very difficult, and that's how it happens. And so it's possible to delude ourselves also, not just fall prey to a New Age guru or somebody trying to exploit our search, but to also fall into a loop of not assessing enough whether we are actually arriving at the places and to the extent we would like to with our own spiritual search. So there can be, impromptu teachings. Someone reads a book on meditation and has a powerful experience, and then next thing you know, they're hosting retreats to help others meet their divine self or something. Or more and more problems are there with, usually people train for a long time, for decades, in a family tradition, before facilitating in traditions like Witi. Right? But recently, increasing number of people take like a couple of weeks or a 6-month course and then call themselves shaman and then facilitate. And sometimes vulnerable people, sometimes even desperate, literally put their lives in their hands in a remote forest, in a quite dangerous ritual without phone reception. And meanwhile, the real shamans, they're probably in the next village, but the clients wouldn't know that because they wanted it to be real. And so they convinced themselves. And if this is our own approach, if this is how seriously we take spirituality, then we've reduced it somewhat, right? To a commodity, to feel special, as a way to bolster my ego, not to educate my ego. And so for every professor at university or for every driving instructor, we expect from them years of full-time work in their field before we listen to them. But for spiritual guidance, it's enough that I want to believe and that it sounds nice, isn't it? And if that is so, it says something about my relationship with myself, my self-respect, self-solidarity. So that would be another cost of comfort. If my religion is based on hope and trust, and I want to be spiritual, but leave religion out of the equation, then what I'm left with is faith in the form of hope, which is without the verification. So all I can do is pray for verification because I have faith, but not the structure. If, on the other hand, my religion is experience-based, about my knowledge or understanding, then at least I have a way to verify things for myself when I'm alone. But even then, I can still delude myself. You see the issue here. And that might be one of the reasons why the term spirituality is so, in Germany, so anschlussfähig, as we say. Best translation might be vulnerable to randomness, having no distinct meaning at all. So what is the solution? I suggest to stay alert, to practice self-solidarity, especially in religious context, and to always apply critical thinking to myself. If I want to explore spirituality, it's good to identify a path and a teacher which speak to me, and then commit to that for a meaningful length of time until I develop enough clarity to assess what that caused in me, my own experiences, right? So I can assess that. I'm einschätzungsfähig. That's just a practical idea. As in these trying times, we face increasing instability and uncertainty, while our society also becomes more individualistic. And yet we crave deeper meaning. And glimpses of light amid all the disorientation. In such a time, we are quite vulnerable. But now, as we always have been able to be, we can form strong connections. As bad and cynical as it may sound, when the purpose of community becomes self-evident, because it is about immediate resistance, then all of a sudden it can become very clear to me as the individual personally, what are my values, which greater purpose I can serve. So that said, I'm not advocating for the collapse of civilization and values just to strengthen community bonds, not at all. But ideally, we feel purposeful without needing all that, you know. But it can be a catalyst to cut through a lot of questioning when it gets more urgent, sadly. A central challenge of religion in times like these is the demands of political progress and spiritual progress often seem to contradict each other. Political progress says fight. Religion might say surrender. Politics might say insist, keep pushing. Religion might say let go, learn to let go. It's like push through versus detach. If we confuse when and where these are respectively called for, then we risk weakening both departments, the personal, the political, and the spiritual. So what could be the path forward? If New Age spirituality is feel-good, escapism, trademarks, does that mean we have to accept a traditional religion? No, I'm not saying that. I won't tell anyone what to believe or what to follow. I just want to highlight something that is very rarely clearly stated. Spirituality does not have to be nebulous. It only becomes nebulous if we accept something that contradicts reason, or if we make it up as we go. My conclusion of this talk and request is, let us prioritize solidarity in a way that also accounts for our spiritual needs. That may look different from individual to individual. Let's stay awake and aware, because religious exploitation is a very effective way to target vulnerable individuals. If someone tells us we need them to fix ourselves, we should always know what to think. Let us educate our ego by truly learning about ourselves from the inside perspective. And when it comes to community, religion, and spirituality, experience always beats wishful thinking. As a religious person, I encourage everyone to never stop questioning, never stop asking, and always engage in it until the doubts are cleared. On the cognitive level, also on visceral level, and on a level of what we call the heart, and also through everyone's own lived experience. If it's not welcoming, clearing the doubts, then it's probably not your friend. And verifying against our own experience does not mean we have to be rigid, right? Reframing our experiences is sometimes necessary, always, as we learn new things from daily, regular life, just by maturing and learning, but remaining reasonable doing so. That is always necessary. So a degree of openness is needed. Some initial trust, not blind belief, a willingness to listen and to ask, evaluate, and reevaluate. If we can do it this way, then our skepticism will serve us rather than isolate us. And if we do this, we will always remain safe in our spiritual endeavors. And then we will have already practiced self-solidarity in a profound and meaningful way that might even be able to help others. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Swami, for your lecture. I very much appreciate your critical reflection on the importance and relevance of experience, your critical assessing on New Age or fashionable spirituality that is easily commodified. And I think we all can think of examples or just go to the local bookstore and see how popular this has become for a couple of decades now. So thank you. Very rich, thought-provoking keynote this morning or afternoon for us. We do have time for some questions and comments that we can take from the audience. Um, I was wondering, and I don't know if you would like to talk about this, but as someone who has known you as an artist and as a political activist, I was wondering if spirituality has always been a strong part of your life that you felt needed more space, and or if you were willing to share a little bit of your own experience of making that kind of a privileged aspect of your life. And because
Mm.
I would imagine that turning to monastic life is not an easy decision that you just make, but a longer process.
You mean how that happened?
Yeah, basically, yes.
Yeah.
I try to be more
Yeah.
elaborate, but yes, basically.
Yeah. No. I did not mean to to be all curt or something. I'm sorry. Mm, in my case, it actually just happened. So I have probably always been spiritual, but I didn't know that because it was not spiritual in the Western understanding. So I could not identify what that was. And once I learned more about that tradition I'm following now, I found that and learned from it. All of a sudden, in hindsight, I understood much more about my entire life, about my process. So for me, it was very easy to verify the teachings with the explanation. I also had the privilege of having such a brilliant teacher and compassionate one. So for me, that was very easy and natural. And it just became like from a small river to it. I found it more and more relevant. And it was really, I can just, I mean, say how it is. It was just grace, really. It was not really a decision. I'm not for making such a crass decision. I would not recommend that. It just actually happened. Over the years and years and years, it became more and more important, more relevant to me. I understood more about myself. And then the other things became less relevant for the time being, because I found if I can focus on that, if I can make that central, like you said, the privileged part of my life, if I can revolve around that, all other things will be much easier. And that's what happened. So, and that it was possible, that also was grace. So it just fell into place. It happened naturally. Seen from the outside, I can see how it can seem a little, weird, but it unfolded so effortlessly and naturally over many years. But that it was a process more than a decision.
Mhm. Beautiful. Thank you. There is a comment in the chat or a question that relates to your previous work. If there is any are there any plans to translate Deutschland schwarz-weiß, der alltägliche Rassismus, into English to make it more accessible to a wider audience? And also, if you, and I think I didn't mention that in introducing you, if you could also talk about your crime novel, Die Schwarze Madonna.
Yeah, that is one of the beauties of monastic life is that we have the license to let go of ambitions also. And that doesn't mean I'm not doing anything and just sitting around. That would be fall under spiritual bypassing, right? But I'm rather not too keen on making a point that has already been made. I'm sure that so much about what back then I felt the need to explain because nobody was explaining it in an understandable way to me. I had to figure it out myself, I felt. Although many people understood it generations before, but the teaching was kind of interrupted. And so I thought, if I can write it down so that other people will not have the need to even explain it anymore. That was my big motivation to do that. So they can just put the book on the table, be like, thank you for this discussion we are not having, read this. So, and that was that ambition, right? I don't see that so much necessary for the American or English context because it is not applicable. I think now with the internet, so many people are already explaining so well and so wonderfully and so, intricately what all is going on, from the history to the effects, to the societal and all that. I'm not sure how necessary that is. In translating such a book also, it would be almost necessary to translate the sociological context with it, because it's from a German context, right? So who is not in the German context will not understand. There will be many things that are not clear, that are not understood, because segregation works totally differently in Germany. We also have segregation, but it works completely differently. So all of that would have to be explained, which I invite everyone to do. Like, if someone feels it worthwhile to translate, go ahead. And I think even today, automatically, one can translate a whole page, right? So if someone can feed the ebook in their translating program and then ask someone to edit it, there you have it, right?
Okay, thank you. There are more questions. Ruth Spencer would like to know, what does a day in the life of Swami look like now?
Yeah, not so much different actually to before, because before I already, well, for some years, very focused on spiritual life. So getting up very early in comparison to artist rock and roll life, of course. So, there's an hour called Brahma Muhurta. That is a very auspicious hour when the sun comes up. The hour before the sun comes up, there's profound silence in nature, in the house. And it is so much easier to find that silence in yourself at that time. So if it's possible and one is spiritual and likes to meditate or contemplate on a text or a philosophy, something like that, it is a wonderful time to make use of, because it just supports contemplation. So accordingly, getting up early and studying some scripture, and some hymns are there that are chanted wonderful hymns. I like the musical and the rhythmic format. Chanting that helps to integrate the text into this body, right? If I just read it, then it can retain it can be more present itself like information or something like that, and then I think about, and it's cognitive and intellectual. But when I chant it, and the Vedic chants have a very defined pronunciation and rhythm and even tones, so it is an art form in itself. Doing that breaks all these barriers of intellect and cognitive and artists, that it just becomes fully one's own. And by doing that, that is, I find it a wonderful way to be religious, to deal with a religious text. So that will be done for some time. Then there are some classes, either chanting classes or Sanskrit classes, or also some yoga classes. Community yoga is there. We're offering therapeutic yoga for community veterans, people who have been activists for a long time, decades, and who do not find psychosocial assistance in the German society because what they do and what they're about and is not understood properly, and the Ausbildung, the training of the therapists and psychologists is not racism aware at all, and especially in the intersectional context, then it's completely lacking. So when you're not cisgendered, or when you're gender non-conforming and neurodivergent, then they're really totally at their wits' end. So, and that is trying to offer some space and also some practice in self-regulation for those people who can benefit, whom it can benefit the most. Because self-regulation is free, right? Once you learned it and you can implement it, it is a wonderful, empowering thing. You don't have to talk to anybody you pay a lot of money for. You don't have to go to a class in a weird environment. And you can do it by yourself in your room. You just have to learn it how. So that will be, some of that will go on in the morning. And then normal, decent, some food and, and then some writing. So the spiritual practices is woven throughout the day. And much of it is in thought, actually, in an attitude and in intent. And the day is framed by it. And I am not in an institution where I like work in a hospital or something like that and have certain times of day and have to stay up long, so I can have the privilege of structuring the day like that. And I'm still writing and can still, right now I have the opportunity to keep a mindful daily rhythm that I'm very thankful for. Why are you asking? Are you interested? Are you are you finding out if it is for you? No, just kidding.
I'm sure there are attendees here thinking about how they would do in such an environment, or if there's something they could benefit from adding more spirituality into their life. And maybe this part of what you shared about your daily routine connects to a comment or a question by Keith Green. Thank you for sharing so much of your insight and time with us. I needed all of that, he writes. I feel the lack of attention to spirit you note in the focus on the body in academic work. So Keith Green speaking, I study systems of oppression, and people talk about violence against bodies, but of course we are not just bodies. People are more than flesh. Would you just say a few more words about how so-called academic work would benefit from an attention to spirit and not just bodies?
Certainly it would. But in academic realms, I think it is difficult because the spirit is something difficult to define, and it is also highly cultural. So even in German, spirit, mind, spirit, brain, thinking process, this is not actually properly separated and defined. So how to even address it, right? And much already is helped when this focus on the body is broadened into even just incorporating mental health and psychology, that level of suffering, right? That is not the same as spiritual. And even that is still somewhat behind. Today we know that there's no disease of the body that is reduced, that can only be reduced to the body, right? We are complete vehicles in that. The body always has a psyche and a mind, unless it is dead, right? And a psyche always carries around a body. So everything in the body will necessarily influence the psyche. And the nervous system will influence the mood. Mood will influence the thinking and the planning and the whole outlook and attitude. That in turn will be seen and manifested in the body. So it's a loop all the time. So now allopathy has found out that psychosomatic, psychosomatic effects are a thing. So confirmation is there, which is just traditional wisdom in many other cultures. But I think on the spiritual level, it is even more difficult because it is so hazy. I think in academics, it would help for now to be more curious and more open about the connection of the rest of the body, the nervous system, and the mental and psychological health. What neuropsychology, endocrinology, all these connections. I think that will help address and heal and help address pain and alleviation of pain and spotlight that type of suffering. I personally think concerning spirituality, that will be very, very difficult because it's hard to grasp. Right? The mind in Vedanta, for example, the mind is often split up in 4 different functions. So buddhi, the intellect, the reasoning; manaha, the oscillating, the should I or shouldn't I? Did I or didn't I? Was that too much? Or I'm not sure. Also with the emotions together. Ahankara is the ego, the sense of I. So my identity. How am I involved? Not necessarily in a judgmental way, but just the seat of I. And memory, chitta. So even this sort of philosophy, you can expound on that for entire year and it will be super interesting, right? And that is just one tradition in one religion, in one area somewhere. So there are philosophical and theological schools that do that. And that exists also in research or in academia or in studies. And one can go there and study that and how all the traditions, deal with that. But I think what you mean in our academia and in these realms, it would already be a great help and a great start to just be about the psyche enough. That would be great relief. And then take it from there. I think that would be nice. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I have another question that again I think connects beautifully to the previous one and to what you just elaborated on, that there are so many traditions that in itself are really complex and require years of reading and studying. And there's one question by Melody Makeda, led one. How did you choose your particular spiritual tradition?
It shows me I did not know that it exists. I stumbled across it by coincidence and was floored that such a thing exists. I did not have not in my wildest dreams did anything like that occur to me, that such a philosophy exists. So I was looking for some philosophical basis of some yogic teachings I had learned when in my training to become a yoga teacher. We were always recurring to some spiritual elements that always had some sort of philosophy, but that was never taught or really, elaborated upon. And always when I asked questions, they were happy I was asking questions, but said that would take too long to explain. That is difficult to explain here. So I was looking to find that, and that is how I found the Vedanta, Advaita Vedanta, the study of the Vedas, of the Hindu scripture. Well, it is an oral tradition, so it's older than scripture. Of course, it has been written down then eventually. That is, and from that scripture, the Upanishads mostly are seen and studied, which is, we could say, the mystical tradition of the Vedas. Interestingly, of many religions, the mystical traditions come very close to each other in what they say. So the transcendental teachings are not very different, if I may say so, at their core in what they say. How they arrive there, of course, is vastly different. But I happened to come across this, and also, like I said, I happened to come across a teacher that explained it in such a compassionate and also societally aware way that it was to me, where I was at that time, immediately acceptable. That cannot be a statement about the quality of teaching. That is just a statement about what I was ready to understand at that time. I'm convinced it found me. So there's also a saying, right? You don't when you're ready, you want a teacher and you're ready, then that teacher will appear. And I think like that it was with religion for me. So it just appeared and said, "Here I am." And I said, "I didn't know religion could be like that. I don't mind that. That's interesting. Let's listen to that for a while." And then I got hooked. So be careful what you read. That can be the outcome.
Thank you so much again for your talk, for your generous way in answering the questions and commenting on people's thoughts, for differentiating between spirituality, religion, faith, and sharing your own journey, your own educational purposes with us. Before we end, I want to alert the attendees to information that I put in the chat just now. Please take a look. It concerns the online retreat, Writing My Story, also supported by Swami. And again, I want to thank all of you for attending this keynote, for your insightful questions and comments. And of course, again, a huge thank you. We are all very much appreciative of your time and your lecture this afternoon, Swami. Thank
It
you
is
very
my
much.
privilege. Thank you so much for all your generosity and your Vertrauensvorschuss. What is that? Your advance in trust and your extended attention. I really appreciate.
Thank you.